And I'll introduce. Thank you. Francis Grumbly is an enrolled member of the St. Regis Mohawk tribe of.
Akwesasne.
Thank you. She's currently living, thank you, in Norwalk, Connecticut, and is the executive director of the Ingrid Washinawatok Issa Flying Eagle Woman Fund, which was established in 1999. Francis has been involved with the American Indian Community House since its inception in 1999.
1969.
I had 69, but I misread it. Thank you for the correction. Since 1969, and works diligently for the community. She has served on the board for over 10 years and is currently the board treasurer. So welcome. I'm so delighted that you're here with us this morning. And I have a few questions for you. I really appreciate it. So first of all, please share with us your experience of growing up on the St. Regis Mohawk tribe.
Well, it was really pretty interesting. We lived in Connecticut, but we went back to the reserve every summer, and it was such a different life. No electricity, no running water, no automobiles. You know, we lived very, very freely. It was really very nice. It's on the St. Lawrence River, so we would visit the St. Lawrence River. And my family, we're water people. We love the beach, we love the water. So at that time, we were able to swim in the St. Lawrence River, which, as you know, got very badly polluted. And I mean, you couldn't even eat the fish out of there, but they are making a little bit of progress. We went to, every Friday night, they had dinner at the fish camps where they would just pluck the fish out of the holding, and the women would do potatoes, corn, tomatoes. They would make bread, and they would light the torches all along the river, and we ran around like wild little Indians. But it was such a free way to live, and you know, it was very delightful. It was interesting. We used to say, because I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, that it was like going to summer camp. We're always happy to go. We went the day after school got out, and we came back the day before school began. So it was a nice life. I've been back a couple of times, and I have to say it has greatly changed. But, you know, that's progress.
You know, we chatted on the phone before, and we were talking somewhat about how there were many Mohawk from the Mohawk Nation who lived here in Brooklyn. And I think that some of you may not know, and some of you children may not realize, that Mohawk were very important in building New York City's bridges and skyscrapers.
Yes.
So were any of your family part of your nation? I know your nation was involved. But
yes, my father was an iron worker, and he was responsible. Sometimes growing up, I would look at some of the bridges and go, I think my dad might have done that, you know, just having no idea where he, you know, worked. But in Brooklyn, State Street, that was a total Mohawk neighborhood. There was one building, was it 375 State Street, that was totally Mohawk people, iron workers, you know, families. My sister lived there, my nephew lived there, many of our friends lived there. It has since been sold, since they started to gentrify Brooklyn. But there was a Mohawk church down the street where they held the mass in Mohawk. You know, it was really a good time. Pardon? Oh, it's a condo. Oh my gosh. Anyway, now, since I've been working at the community house, a lot of the native fellas come down. They don't live here anymore. They travel back and forth. They come down on a Sunday night. They work 5 days a week. They immediately go back home, because it is a little bit easier with throughways now. Then I remember when we would go to the reservation, it would take us 2 days before they had the throughway built. The throughway, you can get up there in about 8 hours. So But yeah, it was a vibrant neighborhood, definitely.
We also talked about how I grew up in Western New York State, and I was very fortunate as a child, particularly in high school. We learned about the Haudenosaunee, and where I grew up was the Seneca Nation. But I just loved the stories of the peacemaker and how important with originally the 5 nations and then the 6 nations. And my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the peacemaker went to the Mohawk Nation first when he was bringing the different nations together for peace. But I'm wondering what you were taught about that.
I did hear that. But, that's as far as I know about it. But yeah, but he was a great leader among the Haudenosaunee. And I don't know if any of you know, but the government that we have today is kind of based on the Haudenosaunee society, which was comprised of 5 nations. It was like the first democracy where everybody was equal and everybody had a say, and so of course they changed a lot of the things, but basically
Including the matriarchy.
Oh yes, including the matriarch, because we are a matriarchal society, and meaning that we chose our leaders. We had a definite say in what they did, how they conducted themselves. And then, of course, they did what they needed to do, but they relied totally on us. And even to this day, our society relies on the matriarchs, the clan mothers. The clans have clan mothers rather than, clan fathers or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, it's a very interesting way of life, and it certainly worked. And of course, they always talked, now you've heard about the 7th generation, they always talked about Mother Earth being everything, and how you must protect it, and how you must take care of it, nurture it, all of those things. And we've had several of our people say 25 years ago that the ice is melting. And here we are, the ice is melting. And what would happen to the land if we did not take care of it? We only took what we needed. We used everything that we took. We used everything when we killed animals. It was for food. The skins were used for clothing. The bones were used for needles. I mean, very, very little was wasted. And of course, now there's so much waste. You go by and you see the dumps. It's like, it's sort of, kind of disheartening. And I do want to mention Dupree, that song about the water. Rick Chavolia went to Standing Rock during that whole period of time, took a whole contingent and stayed up there. And maybe he could tell you a little bit later about what that was like. But we were so proud of him and the people that went. We were so happy to support, and it was a pretty horrible time, pretty horrible. So.
Thank you. I'm going to call on you later, Rick. I just want to get back briefly to the Confederacy and just put sort of a fine point on the fact that Benjamin Franklin and George Washington acknowledged that the Constitution was based, in some parts, almost verbatim, on that Confederacy, on the peace treaty. And so they acknowledged it. It took the current day Congress till the mid-1980s to actually pass a resolution acknowledging that that was the case. It took that long to acknowledge it. And just another point about that, when I mentioned that they left out the matriarchy. So this summer I went to Seneca Falls, not too far from where I grew up. And so the Women's Rights Conference was held there, and they invited local matriarchs from the Haudenosaunee there. and they inspired so much of the Women's Rights Conference. And one of the many things that they said is, you women have to make sure you assert yourselves, because we still do that in our nations, and you need to do it in your nation.
Exactly. Yeah. They have the final word on, they can actually ask someone to leave. They can depose a chieftain. They have the power to do that.
I'm envying that. Yeah, yes. Oh, hold on a second.
No, I was just going to say
Hold on a second. We want to make sure our hybrid folks hear you.
people have probably been to Central Park, and there's statues there of the founders of the women's movement, and there's no native woman there. So
Yeah.
it's a really, really unfortunate, oversight. So
Yeah, it is.
That sounds like a new petition we need to start. Let's get more information on that before you go and see what we can do about that. So you mentioned the American Indian Community House. So we'd love to hear more about that and what services it offers. You were there when it was founded in 1969. And I just want to say that when I was a clergy leader at the New York Society for Ethnoculture, Rick and I got together, and partly because of H's work at Standing Rock, my daughter Emily and I heard that you were doing a program, and so we showed up to learn more about it, and that was when we met you, and we learned more about the American Indian Community House. So please tell us about the founding of it and your involvement, and then we'll get to how we can be more supportive.
Well, it was actually founded by a number of volunteers who would gather together and talk and whatnot. And then they decided that there was such a large Native American community in New York that we should have a real gathering place for them. So that's how it was founded. And then it took shape. Our first gathering place was on 38th Street in a little storefront. And, it was quite interesting. And then from that, with government funding and different grants and donations, they moved several times until they finally settled on 404 Lafayette and 708 Broadway, right in the NYU area, which was absolutely wonderful. And what we had there was, we had what we always liked, what we call the circle. And we had many programs. We had health programs. We gave housing direction if people came, and it was the place that people came to from all over the country. So many different nations were there: Choctaw, Apache, Navajo, Shinnecock here from Long Island, Sioux, so many different ones from all over. Rick's people, they came from all over the country, and it was the place to go to get them started. Now, I do remember that some of them didn't make it, because we all know that this city can eat you up. But we tried our very, very best to accommodate them, make them comfortable. We had people who gave them places to sleep for a few nights. As a matter of fact, my sister actually gave her apartment to people who came all the time. She would let them stay all the time at her apartment. So that's how it got started and evolved into what it is now. In 2017, we lost our funding, and we thought we were really, really going to be out of business. We contemplated that thought, and then we said, no, we cannot let this happen. My sister, Rosemary Richmond, was the executive director for 40 years, and we thought we cannot let that legacy go. So we all put our own money into it. Rick, all of us, we were buying, paper and, ink and whatever we could do, giving our time to keep the place going. And little by little, we made our way up, and now we have been donated a place on Madison Avenue. It's not as big as the one that we had, which is going to be our dream. And we're also, Rick, worked very hard to get us a house on Governor's Island. So we have a seasonal house on Governor's Island where we have many activities and events. We have an artist residency there. We've held a social event on the lawn, and it was really, really nice. So our aim is to keep our culture and our community connected and moving forward.
And my understanding is that there are over 100,000
There
Native
are-
Americans in the New York City area.
That's what they said. There are about 100,000. Now, we haven't seen all of them. We would like to. That would be wonderful. But yeah, there are. Some of them, of course, are tribally enrolled, and many of them are not, and that's okay. We know who you are. We know who natives are, and we welcome everybody. So, that's what we do. So we have some of our programs are back up. We're working on our health. We're working on, we do a lot of events for our culture. We have a youth group now we've just started up. We're really, really we started with 2 employees, and we now have, 7 or 9? 7. We now have 7. So we're making some great progress, and before you know it, we'll be right back where we were. We are looking for a larger space to house us and the other organizations that we support, which we did in the past.
Please tell us about the Flying Eagle Woman Fund. And I know this is your heart is there, so please tell us about that.
Ingrid Washinawatok Issa was our board chair, and she was working with an organization that would go into various countries, Africa, South America, and help them build schools, help the indigenous people build schools and things like that. And she went to Colombia with 2 other people. They were kidnapped by the FARC, which was the revolutionary people then, and they were marched around for about 10 days, and then they were killed. So as a result, we started the Flying Eagle Woman Fund in memory of her name and the work that she does. And at the end of the title, it says for social justice, but it's such a long thing to say. So her husband, Ali, my sister, Rosemary, and I started doing the work, and I became the executive director, and then we were given a really nice donation. So we had an office at the community house to continue that work. And we gave scholarships to young Native American women students. We were very actively involved until, unfortunately, Ali passed away a little over a year ago at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which Ingrid was working on, but she did not see it come to fruition because, of course, she was killed. So we just kept that work going. We have many friends all over the world. I recognize their faces, but I don't know all their names. And so we go, oh, hello, how are you? And then I go, I can't remember her name. But yeah, so that's what we do. What is going to happen with the Flying Eagle Woman Fund? We were donated land in New York State, Ithaca, and we have donated that land to the American Indian Community House. Ali and I wanted to have a camp, a retreat center, that kind of thing, but of course, we never quite got around to it. So now we're passing that torch on to the American Indian Community House. And of course, with Rick there and a number of us, we will make this happen. So and what is going to happen, then I will step down as soon as I get this land transfer, pinned down, and it's almost there. Then what will happen is Ingrid's son and her niece are going to turn the Flying Eagle Woman Fund into an archival thing. Most of all of Ingrid's works, which are, you can't even begin to list them all, will be at the Menominee Library, because she was Menominee from Wisconsin. So that is what's going to be happening. That will be a sad day, but it'll be good to know that the legacy goes on with the Flying Eagle Woman Fund land to the community house and the archival at the library. So, but it was a very hard time. Very hard.
You said Menominee, and I just had a small world connection because do you know Ada Deer was a member of the Menominee Nation, and she was also a very active member of the Encampment for Citizenship, which was started by the New York Society in 1946, and included Native American young people. And she died a couple of years ago, but it's just a dear, dear friend. So another small world connection.
We believe that there's the circle, the circle of life. We're all connected. We're all related. That's why we always say all our relations, because we are.
I'm going to take this opportunity to invite you up here, Rick, because I know we wanted to hear some things. So you stay there.
No, he can sit here.
No. I'd like you to stay.
Right, I might not be able to get back up.
Also, you're a matriarch, so I want to make sure. Okay, great. So you want to do it that way? Great.
Sure.
Okay. So anyway, let me so you mentioned Standing Rock, and that was how I met you, because as I said, my daughter Emily and I went to American Indian Community House, and we heard that you were doing a program, and we wanted to learn more. So please tell us about that experience. And also, I just want to say that Rick partnered with me at American Ethical Union Assembly in Albuquerque a few years ago and brought to us folks from the Southwest. So please.
Well, really, as Ingrid's quote says, our first responsibility is to the land. And you all know when we say the land, we mean all of our relatives of the land, so that those who soar above us and crawl beneath us and swim through the waters, and the sunlight that hits our face, and the wind that brushes our cheeks, and everything is that's all our relatives, and that's all. When we say the land, that's what we mean. And so our responsibilities are first and foremost to that land, and really making sure that we honor their relationship with the land. So when we understand that any of our people are being ruptured from that land, and there's something going on there that that trespasses and endangers our relationship with the land as Indigenous people, certainly we're going to come and be in solidarity and do what we can to protect that land and all of our relatives there. And that's what happened at Standing Rock. And in addition to that, which is very, very important, but it's certainly part of sort of this national relationship we have with the United States as sovereign nations, is the treaties. And there were treaties being broken as well at Standing Rock. And so that was very important. But I always say the first is we make sure we fulfill our responsibilities to the land, and then we demand our treaty rights. And both are incredibly important, but first the land. And so when all that was happening, there was really a call out. The Lakota elders, who we're all guests of the Lakota, they made the call out to everybody and asked us to come and support and help them in terms of trying to protect their land. And so we of course responded to that. And for the American Indian Community House, it was a big venture. We gathered a lot of our folks, and we made that drive out in several vans. I even got a ticket in South Dakota, which no, I didn't. Truth be told, I didn't pay it because we were on Indigenous land, so we don't owe them anything. But anyways, so yeah, we went out there with a lot, and we had people who really supported us. There were several clothing and winter gear places that we talked to, and they provided winter gear for us to take out. So we had one van that was just full of winter gear because we went in October and it was about time we knew it was going to get cold. And so we always rely on relatives from every walk of life, to really be with us, and we always have, and so many people came through for us. And when we got there, the experience many of you saw, I'm sure you followed it on hopefully Democracy Now, because that's or some other good source. Obviously there were a lot of obviously my bias is coming out, but there was also a lot of our own social media and a lot of our own media that was covering what was going on. I'm sure you all followed that, so much of what was going on there. But for us, what was most important is we were in prayer, and what oftentimes got the news is when we were in more of conflict, with the National Guard, and that happened, and there were times we felt that was necessary because we certainly had warriors there, and there were times where we felt there was no other way to really be in resistance to that encroachment on our land, other than making some sort of stand, which usually resulted in a lot of direct conflicts with the National Guard and other law enforcement and military units. But most of what we were doing there was being in prayer with the land, and we feel that that's what's most powerful. And so that was much of what we were doing while we were there. And an important thing to know is when we came back, we brought it back because obviously a lot of the funders for those pipelines are the big financial institutions here in New York. So we started organizing people here in New York in a divestment movement. So we worked, and some of you may have been part of that divestment movement, where we were really pushing the major financial institutions to divest from DAPL and from the sources of money that they used to build those pipelines that were actually contaminating the land and water there. And it was quite successful. And we even worked with the city, because the city obviously was investing enormous amounts of money in those financial institutions. So we thought if they could withdraw their money, it would be a real statement on the part of New York. And they in fact did withdraw from Wells Fargo and some other financial institutions. So, we believe any victory is a victory. We know what our final vision is, but it doesn't mean we don't also believe in all the things that we're able to do along the way. And that was important. And I mentioned that because that led that communication and that advocacy we did with the city to divest from a number of the large financial institutions that were funding the pipelines. What was it? The Black Snake. We then were able to start communicating to them about things that we needed here in New York City, which is always first and foremost land, space, things to have, places where we can have our ceremony, we can have our programs, we can have our gatherings, we can have our youth, and so forth. And that's when the conversations about Governor's Island came, and ultimately the commissioners of the city were able to work with the trust fund at Governor's Island and get us a house there, which originally was the Admiral's house, which we thought was very apropos because that had gone back almost 2 centuries. And we know that some of the conversations in that Admiral house were about stealing our land. So the fact that we were able to get that back was really a really powerful thing for us.
We're going to go to a Q&A soon, so be thinking of questions here and also on Zoom. But before we get to that, you mentioned treaties, Rick, and some of your quotations mentioned sovereignty. And I wonder if maybe some of you don't understand or don't know about the importance of maintaining sovereignty and maintaining independence and a separate that separate relationship of being separate nations from the United States, and that even though these treaties, as we know, were violated time and time and time again, the importance of maintaining that sovereignty. And some of you may not realize that. So I think it's an important distinction for us to make, especially because I've got my vote pin here, and I know that some of you, if Nancy voted early and others of us will be voting. So yes, citizens and voting, and also being members of sovereign nations. So if you could speak to that, I don't know how many of you realize that.
Well, that's it. You pretty much summarized. Yeah, that's what it is. We're sovereign nations, and we of course have our own leadership and so forth. And depending on where you are, everything's done differently. The one thing I will say is the one thing I really admire about the Haudenosaunee and some of our other nations is they've never moved from their traditional government. Like Haudenosaunee still, and Frank can tell you more about this, but there's still Longhouse, right? And people are probably familiar with that. Whereas a lot of other nations, and you may know this as well, have tribal governments, which are essentially replicas of the U.S. government. Even though we had our own traditional way of leading our own quote unquote governments, and our own ways of sort of guiding and overseeing our sovereign nations, a lot of us, particularly in the 30s, moved to a sort of a standard tribal government that was very much in the same way as the U.S. government. And it's controversial to say, because it's certainly, I know people on tribal councils. I know people who are part of their sovereign nation governments and so forth. So I'm not making any major statement about it, other than there was a transition but the good thing is, in pretty much all of our sovereign nations, there are still traditional leaders who are not necessarily part of tribal council or tribal, that the government, sort of the formal government, who still provide lots of input and lots of guidance for our people.
Okay, Fran, why don't you continue that? And how wonderful that you've been able to continue. There's an unbroken line. And then I'm going to pass this over to Fiona, and I'm going to go over here because we're going to start the Q&A afterwards.
Well, actually, the word Haudenosaunee means people of the Longhouse. And, that's who we are, and everybody in that Longhouse. We still have ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, and there are rules about them. They have ceremonies for when a person passes on, and when a person becomes part of the hierarchy. So yeah, these traditions go back hundreds of years, hundreds. So, and when Dupre sang that song, we were not allowed to speak our language. So for the longest time, I did not grow up speaking Mohawk because it was not allowed. However, there were certain phrases I knew, and now the thing that just delights me is the fact that all of the nations now have language restoration. So they're teaching, the younger people can speak better Mohawk than I can.
They on their phone.
Yeah, I know.
They have apps, like a lot of our language programs. They have these apps that they can just go on their phone and they can have conversations in our language.
Right.
Well, we're going to open it up for a few minutes of Q&A for folks here and also on Zoom. And I'm just going to ask Pat, could you please display the American Indian Community House website so that people can see that information displayed? And anyone here with a question? Thank you.
And Pat, you might have done it already, but could you please copy that into the chat for the folks on Zoom?
Yes, so we'll put that.
By the way, this is our executive director now.
Yes.
Trisha Tarrant. Yeah, a little younger. That was a few years ago.
Yep.
And there's Joy, who made me this that I'm wearing.
Yep.
Wonderful.
And the gentleman in the back with the hat and the smile, he was our former executive director. And we have Peace, who is part of the drum. I mean, this is a lot of our people.
Any questions here? Yes, Nancy?
Well, I hadn't thought about it before, but I'm not clear. Can you vote in the U.S. elections? You can be a citizen basically of.
We're dual citizens.
Yeah, dual.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
Right.
You are, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We do,
that's-
we do vote, and I tell everybody, vote.
Yeah, great, great. I just,
actually, there are people who refuse to vote in the U.S. elections.
That's
yeah,
right.
Okay.
Some
yeah.
of our people on the reserve do not vote. They just,
Yeah.
yeah,
They'll vote for our
Yes,
Right.
yes,
our nation or some nation election, but not in the U.S.
not
right,
US.
right.
Yeah.
I understand, yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Ponder. Pat, will you let me know if anybody has a hand up on Zoom?
Hi there. So I just wanted to think about a couple of occasions that so a couple of 3 years ago, I used to go up to Foxwoods. And I was wondering what the relationship, I imagine, is entirely different, though they have this amazing diorama at Foxwoods. So while my friends wanted to go use the slot machine, I spent time going through the diorama, which was just marvelous. And then I also had the opportunity to go up to Seneca to see the Seneca bark longhouse outside Victor. And that's a wonderful community restoration that they have up there too. And and then the last thing I wanted to just ask you is, are you supporting the effort to get Leonard Peltier? You know, he could be on Biden's, list of people, pardon list. So those are my 3 comments. Thank you.
Well, we've been on that trail for many, many, many years because we firmly believe that he is not guilty of what they are accusing him of. And we have tried very hard to get him released. Now he is a very old man. He is not well. And each president that came in just did not, they have the ability to pardon him, and they have not, including Biden. So, I have a few issues with him on that order. But so we will, it's a very tough thing. Yeah.
What about Vonda's other question about Foxwoods?
Oh, okay. Do you want to know about Foxwoods? Well, it's pretty interesting because those Mashantuck and Pequots were very, very small group of people. But because they got the funding, and I'll share this with you, they put the word out. Anybody who is related to any of the current Mashantuck and Pequots, please step forward. So they redid their enrollment, and they got the funding to do this beautiful casino. And I'll never forget, that was just like, it was just nothing land, with small houses. The reserve was very small. It's a small plot of land. And the first time I came up that road and hit a certain point, and there was this huge building rising, up, I went, oh my gosh, look at that. So, look, natives, we like to gamble. We don't mind gambling every now and then. We've always done that. We've played gambling games throughout the generations. So we've enjoyed that. So I don't believe that they own that. I believe it is backed. They have backers, but they do get revenue. And I will say this, interesting. The first year when they had the first huge powwow, which they had in the Hartford Civic Center. I had never seen one that big outside of the one that's in, what's that one, Gathering of Nations, which has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of natives come out. And to me, way up high, you could see everything. It was so breathtaking. But basically, they've evolved, and then they took it outside the natural way, which they have outside. It's not as big as it used to be because now there are so many of these, what we call social gatherings, powwows. There could be 2 every single weekend. Whereas before there were not that many. So if you would, it's a huge business. It is a huge business. But that first year when we saw it and they had a ceremony, and I remember this significantly, we could not get Sioux Star quilts. We couldn't figure out why nobody had Sioux Star quilts. Well, they had a new baby born into that tribe, and they had a whole ceremony, and they had hundreds of Sioux Star quilts that they were doing for the giveaway. I said, oh boy, and we used to say, does that baby know right now that probably a millionaire, because, you know, they were getting so much money. Unfortunately, that petered out, and, you know, they get a stipend, but certainly not like what they used to get. We have a casino on our reserve, but all of the proceeds go back into our community. You know, we have built language school, we have the Freedom School. We've done a lot of that. So that's, you know, then of course, Mohegan Sun got one. They're right across the river. So there's a lot of competition between them, and you have to decide which one do I want to go to.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Just so people know, you're probably aware of this, but the vast majority of casinos on all sovereign nations, because we have one as well, as Fran's saying, the money does go back, and it usually goes back to education programs, health programs, things like that. So the money, and it's regulated very tightly, even by our own nations, and of course it's overseen very, very closely by the state as well, for taxation purposes, because we get taxed on all the money that comes in. You probably know that as well. But just so people know, if you do spend money there, it goes to good things. And then I'm going to say things people probably won't like. I don't think Leonard Peltier is ever going to get out. I really don't, because I think the FBI takes it, this is a really personal thing for them. And I think whoever's president, they come and have a meeting with that president, you know, which I'm sure they did with Obama, because there was conversations under President Obama that he was gonna pardon Leonard Peltier, and as you all know, he didn't. And I absolutely know it's because the FBI came in, the powers that be came in and said, look, this one is personal for us. This one we will not relinquish. And I just think that's going to be how it stays. It's sad to say, but I think we get our hopes up. I know we do, and then it.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. I see Tom's hand. Oh, okay, two more. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So first, Madam Treasurer, I have a question about the scale of your various projects and organizations. I'm having a hard time getting a feel for the overall budget that you've got for your different endeavors. Like how big is your organization? And then secondly, the question has to do with our land acknowledgement. I think as you saw, we have a land acknowledgement. The reading of the land acknowledgement tends to vary from presider to presider. And as you can also see, we've kind of commingled it with our expression of concern for women, for African population, for workers. Is there a preferred land acknowledgement that people should be using, and are we conforming to the standards for that?
Great. Thanks, Tom, and then Angel.
well, it's not so much about land back at this point. It's not so much about land back at this point, because look, let's face it, there is no land. And we're certainly not going to take a building. We're certainly not going to say, give us the Empire State Building, because it's on our land. But we are working it out in other ways. You know, we would like to have a building that can be maybe a one floor donated to us so that we can keep our programs going. And I think that, you know, this land back is a very, very popular issue right now, right? But I think for me, I feel like it's gone a little sideways to a degree, you know, so we have to, Rick is very good about keeping people right on track with it. We appreciate him. We appreciate him very much because he does that. Do you have anything to say about land back?
Well, just about the land acknowledgement, even though it doesn't necessarily translate to land back in terms of we want that whole block or 5 acres or this or that. It still is about the land. So a lot of times people put maybe too much emphasis on the acknowledgement and how it's written, because people come to us all the time to advise them on their land acknowledgement. And we do, we form groups and we go through iterations of it, and we review it as an organization and as a group. And we have Lenape, elders come in. We have Haudenosaunee elders, Shinnecock people from all this region, this actual region, as well as just sort of, the general population of H, which is, as we've said before, is very internation. But we don't want people, sometimes people get too preoccupied with that. They want to spend so much time on the editing and the wordsmithing of it that they lose track of what we really want you to do is fulfill your responsibilities to the land and to us as Indigenous people, and spend more time doing that. And all the hours you spend on sort of wordsmithing, you could spend with us and spending time at our programs and spending time at our public programs and so forth. And that gets back to your question about scale. We have all scale. Our powwows have hundreds of people, whereas some of our youth programs may have 10 children. It varies in terms of, depending on what it is, how many people will be there. And we have things just as you do that are hybrid. And so people might come in from all over the region or sometimes all over the nation. We have things that are ongoing. And so people get involved at different parts of different periods of whatever that initiative is. We have ceremonies, sometimes internation ceremonies, and sometimes ceremonies that are done just by people from their particular nation. Like the Haudenosaunee or the Cherokee or the Lakota or whatever, and those vary in size. Some of the things we do, which is very important, is we do a lot of decolonizing work with institutions all over the city. And so that's sometimes just a group of us or certain people within our organization who work with much larger institutions that actually impact sometimes thousands of people, because we're working closely with the Museum of the City of New York. We're working with the Whitney Museum. We're working with New York University. We're working with the CUNY system, and we have faculty from throughout the city universities of New York. And so, and right now, there's probably about 40 faculty in our partnership with CUNY, and we have regular meetings with them and talk to them about how they can decolonize their institutions and bring in more Indigenous presence. Right, both Indigenous studies, Indigenous knowledge keepers, programs, et cetera, and so that has impact. When you think about capacity or scope, that can have a much larger scope. So with all those things collectively, the organization has a pretty significant reach, and it has impacted. And we've been doing that for years. And the resident artist program that we talked about, has affected dozens of artists. The Whitney Museum just had their first major exhibition by an Indigenous artist, and she started with H. So there's the H reach. You can go all over the country, and sometimes all over Turtle Island, which is all of North America, and you're almost inevitably, when you present yourself as someone from the American Indian Community House, there's going to be some native who will say, "Oh my gosh, I was in New York and you all provided meals for me, or you helped me get an apartment, or and that was in 1987, or that was in 1999, or, so there's people. So when we think about, our reach and our capacity and sort of the size of who we are as an organization, it sort of has to be seen in that context.
Thank you. Thanks. We have time for one more here with Angel, and I see Phil's hand up on Zoom. So Angel?
I'm guessing this is already on? Yeah. So as you know, from coming in early, I'm the educator for the kids program. I know that I can educate them and be like, hey, Native American culture isn't just a historical artifact to be looking at. I can say how many different nations there are within our nation that are there. I can look at those facts, but there's a point at which it starts to sort of be tourism almost, right? Mm-hmm. Or it risks being tourism, it risks being othering, it risks being appropriation in teaching. And I'm not always sure how to sort of bridge that and take it deeper, because I feel like there's a certain there's a whole level of facts that are out there that are easy enough for me to bring forward, right? But there's also a point where it sort of feels disingenuous for me to be bringing things forward. But I don't just want to be like, hey, I heard you're an Indian. Do you want to come talk to the kids? Right? Because that's just, That's just wrong, right? But I feel like sometimes that is like the position that people are put in. Do you have any suggestions in regards to integration of greater and deeper information and ways to bring that to the kids that I work with, not only here in the program here, but I also am a teaching artist within schools within New York City and stuff?
Well, I think that you probably should reach out to the community house and our executive director. We do have a new youth coordinator who is native, youth and education, which would be perfect. But we do have a lot of artists who are willing to teach the truth. There are some that just teach, but we can certainly steer you. Like if you say, we would like to have someone come and teach our children about Native art. And because we do have classes where we teach how to do different things, beadwork, doll, we just made corn husk dolls, things like that. So I would say that your best bet is to reach out to either the community house or another good Native American organization of your choice. I mean, there are some all over, but here it's the community house.
Thank you. And we're going to keep that connection for sure.
Real quick, just on the formal level, your timing is perfect with the question because we have a meeting this week with the New York City Department of Education. So one of the things you can do is support us as we try to formalize our advisement around curriculum and around pedagogy and so forth with the educational school system.
Brilliant. Thank you. Phil, you're our last questioner. So,
Thanks. It's Rebecca. I'm here with Phil. Thank you so much.
okay.
Well, maybe it's a question and knowledge share. The question is, I noticed in the Olympics that the Akwesasne team of women in lacrosse came in, and I think that was a first, and they had on their shirts what I referred to as the wampum belt, but I could be corrected, please, in terms of that, what to call it and who was the team and how that came to be, because that seemed very exciting. And at the City University of New York, I teach about cooperative economics and actually ground a lot of my education in what we've learned from the Haudenosaunee and others, Indigenous people around the globe. So would love to connect with the Indian House over that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're very excited about that. We've been working towards that for years. One of our organizations, the American Indian Law Alliance, ED Betty Lyons, works very closely with the Haudenosaunee Nationals and has worked very hard. As a matter of fact, about 4 weeks ago, we went up there to Onondaga and they had lacrosse games going all the time. And it was such a wonderful thing. It was right on the Mohawk, what was the name of that? Onondaga Lake, which is terribly polluted, but they are working on that as well. And, you know, they built this beautiful park which they think is going to take care of everything, but it doesn't. But yeah, we are so proud of our women. We have a women's lacrosse that is really coming up in the ranks. So this lacrosse, which we call the Creator's Game, is just, you know, we're so excited.
And right to the Olympic Committee.
Yep.
That's the last step. They've got to prove it.
That's right to the Olympic Committee.
Great. So a lot to celebrate, a lot to continue in our conversation with our partnership. And now, Pat, you can stop the recording. And I invite again